Hi long range hunting, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about quartering or angled shots for hunting. Now welcome back everybody. I know I've been a little bit absent. I've been sick the last couple weeks, so I haven't really been able to talk, which doesn't do too well for videos. So we're going to get back at it. Today I want to cover angle and quartering shots. You might be asking yourself why this is such basic stuff. The problem is a lot of people forget the basics, and I hear a lot of misinformation, especially on the internet, and lately especially, and people have misconceptions, bad information, bad habits when it comes to taking a quartering shot. Now what this is, for those who don't know, if maybe you're a beginner hunter, is if you have an animal completely broadside, meaning it's standing this way and your bullet's going to go straight through and out the other side. That's a broadside. That's what we really like. It's one of the best shots. Now, if that animal is quartering away or towards you, you're going to have to change your point of aim for your point of exit. Now, just like with archery, it's the same with bullets or archery. You're aiming for your exit hole to make sure that that bullet goes straight through all the vitals you want it, the area you want. And so you're going to have to change that based on how the animal's standing. Now, I'm going to break this up into two portions to cover because this is the most common stuff. The first one is match bullets. There's a lot of misconceptions and I want to kind of clear some of that up. And then the other one has to do with bad shots, basically, and people pushing particular bullets for those bad shots and advocating unethical shots. So we're going to break it down. Let's dive real quick though into the match bullets. Now there's a lot of misconceptions with match bullets, especially for hunting. People don't understand why the marketing is what it is, but they perform very well. Anybody who watches my channel has seen a lot of examples of that. Now, where this comes into play with angle shots is guys will see a video or an animal, and they'll have this animal, it's had great terminal performance of this match bullet, and these are the guys that are saying, oh well, it won't work, and then they jump into comments and say, oh well, yeah, you got lucky with that match bullet, but you shouldn't use it for hunting, blah 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 blah. Well, that video or that picture debunks them. Remember, videos, pictures, stuff like that, the bullet doesn't lie, and that's evidence. So that guy is lying. Well, here's the kicker. Because they've been proven that they're lying, they don't want to admit it. And so what they're going to do is try to twist it. They're going to try to come up with hypotheticals, etc. And the one that I get the most, and why this video really I wanted to touch on it, is they say, oh, well, yeah, it worked because it was perfectly broadside. But if it turns a little bit, the bullet won't do it. Yeah, because the animal going and adding a little bit more isn't going to do it really. You're really not adding that much. I mean, in all reality, you're just not. You're adding a couple inches. I mean, it's still going through the same thing. It's going to be going through. If you angle it slightly and you're still entering the ribs, all you're doing is, let's say it's this thick going through, you change it to the angle, you're adding, a fraction of an inch. It's not like you're adding anything crazy. When you get into that chest cavity, especially with most angle shots, people are doing lung shots. Those lungs, that space inside is full of air. So you have your wall, which is your ribs, your hide, etc. And once you get past that, you have one lung wall, the other side, the other lung wall, the other side, and that's it. And all the rest in there is air. So you're not, once you defeat that first, what I call the wall, you're really not impacting anything crazy. You're simply impacting a lot of dead space. And so, are you really going to increase what you're going through by changing the angle? No. The only way you're doing that is if you're hitting the shoulders, or when you go forward, you start to get into that neck meat. But let's look real quick at just basic anatomy. So when you're talking about an angle shot, you want to go about the back of the ribs. That's where you're going to find the back side of those vitals are. You don't want to go into the guts. I'll cover that in a second. But you want to go from there, and then you can go forward. Now, the only way you're really gaining anything is when you get up there. If you're impacting through the leg, you're going to get a little bit more resistance just from bone or muscle tissue or both. But is it going to change the outcome of it? Not really. I mean, it's just really not. If you have a match bullet and you're shooting above its maximum impact velocity, but if that's really any projectile, then yeah, you can get shallow penetration, but it'll still kill it. So people say to think that if you impact a leg, it's going to stop that bullet just dead right there. And that's not reality. It's really not. Not even with a match projectile is that going to happen. But they try to claim that kind of stuff. Once you get to the front of the animal, however, you do have that neck, and depending on how it's standing, if it's got its neck up, if it's got its neck down, but you still have a spot in between the shoulders and the head where you can impact, and you get slightly more meat there, not a whole lot much more than what you would get here. And I'm just talking a very, very small amount. It doesn't get thicker until you get more on the front side. The rib cage, though, however, is the same going through. All those ribs are the same size, etc. And so, realistically, are you changing anything? No. You're getting a little bit more dead space, but what you're actually penetrating as far as those walls and those lung walls, you're really not seeing a change. I mean, fractions of an inch. So, it's funny that they say that. Oh, well, if it turns away from you, you have to add an angle, and you're going to get, an extra 2 inches of, dead space inside there. Ooh, it's going to change. No, it's really not. I mean, it's just, they're trying to come back with something because they've been proven wrong. And it amazes me how many people believe that. I actually had this conversation with a really nice person in the comments a few weeks ago, and they weren't saying that had been said to them. And so that got brought up, and that's kind of what inspired this. It's just, it's comical to me that people would actually believe this, that people would think that that animal turning slightly is really going to change the outcome, or if that bullet's not going to penetrate. If it's blowing through that deer on a straight broadside, a little bit of angle isn't going to change anything. Just plain and simple. A great example. This is from a fallow deer I shot several years ago. Now you can see that there's a lot of damage there on the entrance side. That's that hydraulic shock. That's what causes that meat damage like that. It's not the bullet blowing up. That's something I hear very commonly, and it's really not. It's hitting with such a high impact velocity that that hydraulic shock is starting sooner, and it's starting inside the ribcage. That's where you get that large hole. Now that was a quartering shot. I set it right at the back of the ribs, right where the end of the vitals are, and it stopped just under the hide in front of the shoulder. Now this is the actual bullet from it. So, I mean, you can see it expanded. It didn't blow up. It expanded nicely, and it went through a straight line. It took 2 steps and dropped. Really, really good performance. The entire chest cavity was just absolutely obliterated, and did a good job. So again, that's a match bullet. That was an ELD match bullet, high velocity, close range with a 300 Win Mag. So, I mean, you can definitely do it. I've done a lot of quartering shots, including hitting them more in the front. This is from last year, my buck. I did a forward quartering shot with my 6 Creedmoor, 516 yards with a 110 8-tip. It went about 20 feet and lights out. And then, even my bison, I took that 300 Win Mag on my bison hunt with the same bullet I did on that fallow deer, and I had a quartering shot where it was facing more towards me. And so I put it on the opposite spectrum instead of putting it back here, and it stopped here. I was aiming here right in front of the shoulder, and it ended up stopping about here and completely destroyed it. And that one actually dropped dead on the spot. So, you know, that increase in bone on the bison really aided in that expansion and really aided in opening up that cavity and just obliterating everything in there. So, I mean, the bison is a huge animal. It has the largest bone structure of any North American animal. So if it's going to do it on that, it's going to do it on your puny little white-tailed deer. So, you know, don't believe everything you hear. You know, use some common sense with all this stuff. Now, I do want to point out something. Now, it's not a shot I advocate. Some people do it. You really need to know what you're doing, because one, over penetration on this is just going to lodge that bullet in the guts. And that is a full frontal shot. Now, people tend to think there's like a bunch of bones in there or something. I don't know what they think with that. It's not actually true. If you look, you can see in the front there's actually a gap and there's no like middle bone there. And so if you actually take a full frontal shot through the neck going back into the chest cavity, you're not actually, unless you hit those side ones, if you go straight on, you're not going to impact a bone. Now, you are going to get an increase in meat because of that neck, and so you are increasing some expansion there and your penetration, but that doesn't mean it's not going to work. If you know that bullet's going to penetrate X amount of inches and it's going to stop prior to hitting the guts, then you can do that. It's going to go in, it's going to open up, it's going to dump that energy, and it's going to stop prior to reaching the guts. And so the chest cavity itself will be destroyed without destroying the guts. Now, the downside to this is if you over penetrate, guess what? You're going to have an issue with it going into the guts. So ultimately, will it work? Will it go through there? Absolutely. You just got to know what you're doing. You got to know your bullet. You got to know all of those limitations and every factor that goes into it. That's not something I advocate. Just plain and simple. Can you do it? Yes. If you're going to do angle shots, I stop about right where the neck meets going back to make sure you're having that angle to where you're right at the back of the ribs. And the same thing vice versa. Back of the ribs, right to in front of the shoulder. And anywhere in between there is going to work really, really well. Now I'm going to go a little bit more in detail on this one. The reason being, I find it's important. People need to have a full understanding of this and why it's wrong. Now, this comes from the last week or so. I've seen multiple people try doing this, and basically what they're doing is they're advising new hunters, and they're trying to push monolithic bullets for the penetration. Well, that's all good and dandy. However, what they're pushing is, oh, well, you shouldn't use a traditional hunting bullet, a match bullet, any of those, any lead core bullet, because you're only getting X amount of penetration. You want, and one guy, no joke, said this, oh, well, your bullet should be able to shoot an elk in the butt, a Texas heart shot, and go all the way through that elk penetrating. No, that's not even remotely true. That is ridiculous to think to claim, because if a bullet is penetrating that deeply, where it's going through, 5+ feet of animal, I mean, seriously, there's not a lot of expansion there. That bullet is basically penciling through to get that type of penetration. That's not ideal performance, and it's a terrible shot. But this guy's logic, and these other guys too, is trying to tell people, oh, well, if you have a normal hunting bullet or a match bullet or whatever, a lead core bullet, you can't take a certain shot because it's going to be angled too much. The bullet won't penetrate deep enough. But you don't have to worry about that with these monolithic bullets. So if that's a poor shot, if it's an unethical shot with a lead core, guess what? Because this penetrates more, you can do it. That is ridiculous. They are advocating effectively taking Texas heart shots or taking really hard quartering shots where you're shooting in the guts. Now, this is wrong for several reasons. And we're going to have to dive into terminal ballistics and bullets real quick to just give a broad understanding of the reasons why. Now, you can go through my videos and watch a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about, temporary wound cavities, energy, etc. And I'm just going to basically touch on it so you have an understanding. Water-based mammals have an elasticity point, so when a bullet impacts it at high velocity, there is a displacement of that water. Now, that's like taking a giant rock, dropping in a pool. You see that water gets displaced around it and it collapses back. With a projectile, you're going to have two wound cavities. Your temporary wound cavity, that's that displacement, and your permanent wound cavity, that's what's left after. So if your impact velocity is under 2,200 feet per second, you have what's called hydrostatic shock. Now, this is a temporary wound cavity. What's going to happen is it's going to expand and it's going to collapse. You're going to have what's left is your permanent wound cavity. So you have your temporary wound cavity, your permanent wound cavity. Now that permanent wound cavity with this is going to be around the diameter of your bullet max expansion. So if it expands half an inch, you're going to have a half-inch wound cavity roughly. Now, this is like taking a rubber band and stretching it until fibers, stuff like that, start to break. It's structurally compromised, but the rubber band is still intact. It's still a rubber band. With the wounding you're going to experience is you're going to have that permanent wound cavity, and then there's going to be organs and stuff that are going to be torn. There's going to be ruptures of blood vessels, arteries, stuff like that. Now, how does that happen? It's a water-based mammal, right? Well, the body has elasticity, but certain parts do not. The heart, the lungs, the liver, and meat, that's why you get meat damage, are non-elastic. And so when that expands, that displacement, that's what energy causes that damage. And so when you're dealing with under 2,200 feet per second with that hydrostatic shock, that's what's going to effectively happen. You're going to have a lot of blood loss, trauma, and you're going to have that permanent wound cavity left. Now, if you're over 2,200 feet per second with proper bullet performance, you're getting into hydraulic shock or hydraulic wounding. And that's basically, it's stretching it beyond the elasticity point of that media. So take that same rubber band, stretch it until it explodes. What does that do to those organs? It's going to explode them. This is where you're going to literally have an entire chest cavity just soup. It's going to slosh around. It's going to be pieces of it. It's going to be vaporized. And it's basically going to stretch, and the temporary wound cavity is effectively going to become the permanent wound cavity. In ballistics gel, what you're going to see is a wound cavity that is significantly larger, 2, 3, 4, 5 times larger than the max diameter of the bullet. And so hydraulic shock, that's what makes a rifle so much more lethal than a pistol when you talk wounding. So you can shoot it in the lungs and still blow up the heart. Whereas if you're in hydrostatic shock, you have to hit the heart directly in order to cause that massive damage. And even then, it's just going to be a hole through the heart versus the heart just going to be obliterated with hydraulic shock. Now, and this is important, when you watch ballistics gel or you see it, that initial cavity, that temporary wound cavity, is going to generally be within a few inches. Depending on your bullet, it's going to be between 2 and 5 inches generally. And so it's that first initial part, and then it's going to open up and be through that cavity, depending on how long your wound cavity is, etc. Now, with these bad shots, now I've talked about the anatomy of the chest cavity, the front and stuff, but when you get to the back end, that's where it differs. Now, unlike with a rib cage shot, as we'll call it, the rib cage, you have bones, thicker meat, etc. Once you get back to the guts, you do not have that. You only have the hide, and then you have basically a stomach wall, which is a thin strip of meat basically. And so when you get into those bad shots where it's quartering too far away and you're trying to shoot through the guts, those guts, that wall, you're not getting the same type of impact resistance. And so that bullet is not going to open up as much, even with the same velocity, because you're not impacting bone, you're not impacting that thicker meat in there, you're impacting just the hide and then a very thin piece of meat that's, less than 1/4 of an inch. And then you're into the guts. So you're not getting a whole lot of impact resistance. So if you shot it behind the shoulder in the ribs, even if you didn't impact a rib, just the meat, you're going to get more expansion there than you would if you're going into the guts. Just there's not the same amount of material there. Now, organs like the heart and stuff are non-elastic, and so they suffer more trauma. Now, the guts are actually elastic. In fact, back in the day, they used to make bowstrings out of the guts because of that elasticity and strength. Now, where does that come into this as a problem? Well, one, it stretches. I've seen animals recovered having helped guys that have gut shot animals to where the guts have actually been pulled out of the bullet or the exit hole. The reason being is because it stretches. It's like trying to stick your finger through a rubber band or something with elasticity. It's going to pull before it finally breaks. And so that bullet, it's almost like a catch. It's going to go through there and it's going to meet a lot of resistance of it slowing that down basically. Also, the guts being elastic, they're not going to get the same type of wounding. So that temporary wound cavity isn't going to affect guts the same way it's going to affect the chest cavity. And where is the majority of that? It's going to be on the front end. And so if you're doing that, the majority of your potential energy is going into the guts, and the guts are elastic. And so what it's going to do is absorb a lot of that. And so that potential energy that you had, it's being wasted inside the guts. Now, gut shots are they're not a good shot. I don't know of anybody who would advocate that for several reasons. One, if you plan to eat it, it can go bad. You rupturing stuff in there is going to cause gases and stuff to get out, and it can actually spoil the meat, especially if it's a long recovery. Gut shots don't bleed like the chest cavity. There's not a lot of blood going through there. And so if you're worried about a blood trail, guess what? You can be out of luck. It's not going to bleed as well. It's a slow death. I had to help a guy. We ended up having to get dogs. We did a whole search. It took us 2 days to find this guy's animal that he gut shot. And 2 days later, we found it still alive, wounded, and in pain. So it is a very painful, slow death. It is not something you want to do. And the meat can be completely ruined. I've seen that a lot. Guys gut shot it. It turns out nasty. And so it's not a shot you should be taking, but you're basically handicapping your bullet on top of that, because that potential energy, that really good wounding, you want a quick, clean kill. Doing this is counterproductive and unethical because you're basically taking away the bullet's lethality in a lot of ways. Because, yeah, are you angling it so that it will get into the chest cavity? Sure. However, by the time it gets there, it's significantly slowed, and you've also ruptured guts, you've punctured stuff, and so it's just non-beneficial. Plus, on the other side too, there's a possibility that that projectile, due to that pull and elasticity, can change directions. That could possibly cause it to not exit, not reach the vitals, or exit out the side, and you just have a gut shot animal without a lot of wounding, and it's going to be a very painful, hard to find. It's going to be a very painful death, and an animal that's very hard to find. Let's say it does get into the chest cavity. Here's the problem with that. Unless it exits, you're really not going to have a blood trail. And by the time it gets into there, it's already lost most of its potential energy. The bullet, because of less resistance as far as the initial hit, and it's not meeting the same type of resistance as the organs and stuff, is not going to give you the same type of performance. Now, can the guts aid with some expansion because of the resistance? Sure. But by the time that it gets in the chest cavity, it's lost so much velocity, it's really not giving that displacement. That's a big deal, like we talk hydraulic shock versus hydrostatic shock. Now, it can be expanded the same diameter, but that velocity is what causes that displacement. The faster and wider, the more it's going to expand, the more displacement you're going to get. And so you are just handicapping yourself. Now, for those people who want to do Texas heart shots or advocate that they do them, not even just doing a severe angled shot to where you're gut shotting the animal, but let's say they decide to do the Texas heart shot. So they see an elk out there, they see its butthole, and they place a round right there. Well, what are you dealing with there? You've got hip bones, you have leg bones, stuff like that. and you have a lot of meat. Now those legs, there's a reason why those legs are bigger. There's a lot of dense muscle. And so you're going to increase your impact resistance. So you have bones, you have really dense, tough muscles there, and then you have the guts. Now, what does this mean for that projectile? Well, guess what? It's meeting more impact resistance than a high shoulder shot. It's meeting more than a regular rib shot. It's meeting more resistance than a frontal shot. So it's going to expand more. It's going to lose velocity more going through. It's going to meet more resistance. The majority of that energy dump, guess where it's going to go? It's going to go into the guts. Now, that bullet is going straight forward in that body most likely. Now, what's some problems with that besides the complete loss of velocity and performance by the time it reaches that chest cavity? One, it's going between the lungs. If you have it dead center, it's going to be going between those lungs. And so there's a possibility with that bullet going so slow, it's not actually going to puncture them and actually can slide in between them. Now, it could go a little bit off and hit one lung or the other, but there's really not a high chance of you puncturing both lungs. There's also not a high chance of that bullet exiting. And so just like with the gut shot here, you're really not going to have any kind of blood trail, which is ironic because the guys that really push using monolithics or harder constructed bullets out of the lead core variety, they always want an exit hole. They want that blood, which is ironic. Those same guys are taking shots that are not only unethical, but there's a high probability that you're not going to get a very good blood trail. So it is just, it's not a good shot. I mean, whether you're doing a hard quarter in the guts here or you're doing a Texas heart shot, I mean, there's a really high possibility that you're not going to get a quick, clean kill. And in fact, it's really, really high that you're not going to. It's going to be a longer death. It's going to be just a terrible shot, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, it really is. The guts are not going to act the same as the chest cavity. That bullet's going to slow down. It's got more media it's got to go through. By the time it finally reaches the chest cavity, it's lost pretty much all of its potential energy. It's not going to be causing the same kind of permanent wound cavity. So it's not a good shot. I don't know why anybody would advocate or try to push somebody to take bad shots. It goes back to just basic hunting ethics. If you don't have a good shot, there's a couple options. Don't take it. That's a big one. If you don't have a good shot, if you can't get the right angle, don't take it. Wait. Try to see if it'll turn. That's a lot of what we do is we'll sit there and watch whether it's archery, long range, short range, and we're going to sit there and watch that animal. Now, sometimes they give us an opportunity, sometimes they don't. But if I've got a bad shot, am I going to take it? No. I'm going to wait for a good shot. So you can either wait, possibly get one and take it. If not, you're just going to have to pass. You can also maneuver. If you're doing spot and stock kind of stuff, you can try to maneuver around and get a better shot. But we're never going to go take a bad shot. Even though, let's say I've got my bow and arrow. Could I do a hard quartering and get it up there? Sure. Arrows act completely different than bullets. But am I going to do that? No. Personally, I'm not. In conclusion, will a match bullet do those angle shots? Of course it will. Just, I mean, it's comical that anybody even thinks it won't. I mean, just plain and simple. It's going to do those angle shots. You just got to understand how to do it, what you're going to be shooting into, but it's going to do it. If it's going to penetrate straight across, it's going to do fine on those angle shots. So if somebody tries telling you that, it's a load of bull. So just plain and simple. And that's one of the most common things I hear. Oh, well, it won't penetrate deep enough if it's an angle. And then on the last part with the unethical shots, I mean, every hunter is going to do what they're going to do. That's up to them. I personally will never take a bad shot. I'm just not going to. If it's a bad shot, I'm just going to pass. Either it gives me an opportunity or it doesn't. Move on. Just plain and simple. You know, don't be taking bad shots and end up having to wound that animal. I mean, we're dealing with live animals here. Ethics is a quick, clean kill. If you're taking shots that are a high probability of not achieving that, then it's unethical. You shouldn't be doing it. You definitely shouldn't be telling people who don't know any better that, oh yeah, you can do whatever you want because it'll penetrate if you buy this bullet. Not something you should be doing. I hope you guys have found this helpful, insightful. Maybe it's answered some questions for you. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below and I'll try to get to them. Everybody be safe out there. Happy hunting.
Hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video, and happy hunting!